Thank you, Dr. Mudassar. I think that was very interesting for somebody like me also who doesn't follow the region so closely. Uh, I mean, you of course didn't, end off on a very positive note, but just the fact that opposition parties are still active, political participation is still, allowed in a certain way. Also, I think has that silver lining to it. I can see some questions on the chat box, but can I invite Ambassador Sanjay Singh? Do you want to speak yourself and ask him?
Thank you very much, Mudassir. Congratulations on trying to explain Turkey to an Indian audience, because this is one part of the Middle East of which there is a huge gap in Middle Eastern study. So very good effort to let us know. In the background of what you said, can you identify leaders, present day leaders or potential leaders in Turkey who could mount a challenge to Erdogan? Like Imamoglu, the mayor of Istanbul, is Abdullah Gül still active, Davutoglu, etc.?
Sure, sir. Should I answer this? Or?
Yes, and some background to it.
Yeah. No, I think you are, and I can actually see your question also, sir. I think, it's important. So Abdullah Gül is not so active. He actually wanted to have a new party, launch a new party, but it seems he was prevented. Some of the debates within Turkey some of the news reports within Turkey was saying that perhaps he was threatening not to kind of stand against Erdogan. So I don't know how far that is true, but he was prevented from competing. So it is unlikely that he would directly come and fight against Erdogan, but maybe he can support some of these leaders. For example, Davutoglu. Again, the case of Davutoglu is also very interesting. He became disenchanted, left the AKP, has now formed a new party, but he has not really been able to capture the imagination of the popular support base. And he is seen as somebody who can perhaps help in terms of formation of new parties, but in terms of a charismatic leadership, perhaps he would not really be able to provide that. One of the key opposition members, the current mayor of Istanbul, Imamoglu, he is seen as a very important leader as far as the charisma is concerned, and his win as Istanbul mayor in terms of symbolism also is quite important, because Erdogan himself was a mayor. I mean, his rise as a politician begins with mayorship of Istanbul. So, but again, if one follows the way things are being done, Erdogan has identified Imamoglu also as a very important leader, as a threat, and there's now a lot of things are being done to try and prevent him from kind of doing anything which can damage AKP or Erdogan. What Erdogan wants is he has been projecting his son-in-law, who is the current finance minister, to try and project him as the future leader, and he has been very active in terms of foreign policy, in terms of local issues also. So, and for example, in the issue in Libya, he has been very active. So these are some of the leaders, perhaps who can perhaps eventually replace Erdogan. But again, I think I would be very circumspect of saying that there can be a very potent, unless there is a serious division between the AKP and MHP, which is the ultra-nationalist secular party. Until there is a break between these two groups, these two political parties, I don't really see a major change in terms of the political system.
My next two questions were whether foreign policy issues play any role in domestic politics. For example, the Eastern Med or the relationship with Russia, and of trying to integrate Russian systems into the Turkish military.
No, so certainly, sir. A lot, in fact, a lot of foreign policy of Erdogan is being driven by that Turkish support base, a domestic support base. That Turkey is emerging as a power in the region, or Turkey can actually revive the glory of the Ottoman Empire. I think that is something which is playing into the hands of Erdogan a lot. So it's both ways. To capture that imagination, a lot of foreign policy posters or a lot of foreign policy issues are being kind of derived, and that is also affecting how Turkey is. I mean, how Erdogan has been able to kind of capture the imagination of his support base. For example, as I was mentioning, for example, any kind of dissent is kind of put as a Western conspiracy against Islam or a Western conspiracy against Turkey. So that is something which is important, and which kind of, or for example, if we look at the recent conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque, that also had a lot to do with the political posturing in terms of showing that Erdogan is strong, and that capturing the imagination of his core support base, who are the businessmen, and who are the in terms of conservative Muslims. So that is something which is very important as far as the Turkey, this current situation is concerned.
There's a lot of them on the chat board, and I thought for paucity of time, Mudassar, would you want to directly just reply to them? Undermining the Leik and Diyanat by going back to Tanzimat of Ottoman era. Maybe, I mean, let's go down like that. Answer this first, and then I'll try and see if I can club. They're all separate, so I don't want to club them here.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Nanda Kishore has asked about the issue of Tanzimat in Ottoman era constitutional amendments in the presidential system, and the issue of Gulen movement and the Sufi Naqshbandiya movement and all that. These are, when it comes to the domestic debates, very important issues as far as Turkey is concerned. But I'll not go back to the Tanzimat era in terms of the reforms which are the amendments which have been brought, because they are entirely of different nature. But in terms of the issue of Diyanat, yes, and this I have discussed in the monograph also, that the issue of Islamization of the education system and the use of Diyanat in terms of promotion of the Turkish soft power, Turkish Islamic identity in the Turkic-speaking countries and in Arab Muslim countries or other Muslim countries also, these have been used. And this is something which plays into the hands of Erdogan. The other issue which Alvite has asked is about the raising of pious generation successfully, particularly resentment of the youths, your assessment on the role of youths. Yeah. So, no, Alvite, you have very correctly pointed out the fact that there is so much of debate about this pious generation. I mean, every time Erdogan goes back to any popular public speech, he talks about raising pious generation, talking about how Muslim youth should be like this, or the Turkish youth should be like that. So all these things he has used in terms of trying to capture the imagination of a certain section of the population. And this plays into the hands of his, in fact, and also in terms of diverting the attention from the economic issues which Turkey has been facing since 2016. So that is also something which is very important. I don't know how things will pan out until 2023 elections, but the kind of politician Erdogan is, I am not very, despite of the fact that the opposition did quite well in terms of the local municipal election in 2019, I'm not very convinced in terms of how far, unless again, going back to the previous point, the MHP breaks away from AKP, and there's new political combination that comes up and challenges Erdogan, it is unlikely. Could you please comment on the night watchman?
Night watchman.
Yeah. So this issue is again a very interesting issue. What happened was that during the Ottoman rule, there used to be night watchmen who had strong powers. They were like, even though they were night watchmen, they were like police. So that has been brought back, and despite a lot of opposition saying that this will lead to issue of rule of law and issues related to especially among minorities in the Kurdish areas, and also Alawis and other minorities also. In those areas, perhaps this can lead to a problem. But again, Erdogan has gone ahead with this, and until unless there is a significant change at the helm of the government, I don't see much scope for a change in terms of this issue. How much time?
There are two questions on the economic impact and the slowdown, but before that, I wanted to ask Kumar. I think he wanted to ask something. Kumar, would you come in here?
Yeah. Thanks, my friend. I'm asking this question because you are a great inspiration to the younger minds. If I understand you correctly, you are studying Turkey for the last 4 years. You are able to get the grip of the basic issues. You are studying Saudi Arabia for about more than a decade, but you are able to make a very smooth transition into Turkey. So if a student were to look for changing the field of interest, what would you advise based on your own personal experience? The reason I'm asking is, both as a student, even outside, we all know that the number of people with whom you can actually have a lively conversation on the Middle East is very limited. So given that drawback, you made a transition from Saudi Arabia to Turkey. So if somebody were to make a similar transition, what would be your advice?
So thanks for asking that question. And
it was not a planted question, okay?
It's not a planted question. I know that. No, I mean, obviously, you know that I was very reluctant initially when this proposal came, in the sense that because I was not sure if I'll be able to do justice to this and simultaneously pursue the interest in Saudi Arabia. I think in terms of advice, or in terms of if I try to go and look back, I think what is important is to work on the basics. What I did was I started with reading some of the basic books in terms of how, for example, Turkish polity has evolved. And that way, the library at IDSA was quite instrumental, because you have some of the best literature available. The second thing was to also look at the latest research being published in some of the journals, especially in Turkish studies and other Middle Eastern journals on Middle Eastern studies. Because if you look at it, constantly there has been new research which are coming up as far as Turkey is concerned. It's not just the popular news channels and the popular debate, but also in terms of debates on people who are doing research on Turkey for some time. So that also was quite helpful in terms of trying to understand as to what is happening in Turkey, trying to put it in some sort of a historical context also was an important role, which played an important role as far as my understanding was concerned. The third thing was my interest in political Islam, or trying to understand how Islamism plays a role in the countries in Middle East. And post Arab Spring, it has become such an important part of the debate on the entire Middle East. That also helped, because I was when I was doing my research on Saudi Arabia also, that also had helped me frame some of the questions as to what kind of things needs to be asked as far as the research is concerned. So that also helped me in terms of kind of understanding Turkey a little better. And in terms of the other way around also, if I look at it, just to spend a couple of minutes on that, in terms of enriching my own understanding, not just of Turkey, but also in the larger, what are the things which are happening in the Middle East in terms of geopolitics, in terms of political rivalries, in terms of issues which are involved. I think that has trying to go a little deeper into Turkey has helped me enrich also. So perhaps it was not that much of a bad idea. I mean, it was despite my initial early reluctance, I think, and again, thanks to IDSA for giving me that space to be able to kind of pursue both these interests and both these issues. So, maybe.
Yeah, okay. So coming back to the question box again. So somebody's asking about the current economic slowdown, which has affected the AKPs and the rural middle class base, and how does that impact on election? Also, also on AKP's economic policies, and how has that impacted on the liberalization and rise of, and so also the middle.
Yeah. So I think these two questions, the issue of economic policy and also in terms of the slowdown and AKP support base in the rural middle class, I think they are interlinked. So what has happened is that if we go back a little and look at the performance of the, not in terms of democratization, but in terms of performance of the government, economic performance and, performance in terms of in terms of the aspirations of the lower middle class. In that sense, AKP has done well. If you start looking back from 2002 to 2000, the first term of the government, 2002 to 2007, that was the time when actually Turkey flourished in terms of its economic, in terms of its economy, and that strengthened the AKP support base. And in 2007, it came back to power with a very strong increased share of vote. And then that is also it is the second term actually where some people trace in terms of the changes which started to be visible. I mean, some people were skeptical even before, but that is where the changes started to kind of become more visible. Initially, it was largely within foreign policy. For example, the problems with Israel or problems with some of the issues which started to come up with the United States, or issues which started to come up with NATO. And then, Arab Spring happened. So until then, Turkey was being considered as a model state because it gave a very good economic performance. It was an Islamist-leaning government, but it was not pushing too much in terms of Islamization within the domestic system, domestic polity and social issues. And also it was trying to respond to the aspirations of the lower classes, the lower middle classes, the farmers who wanted to, for example, those on issues related to the use of headscarf. It was earlier completely banned. What Erdogan and AKP did was that even if you have headscarf, you can attend university, you can attend classes. So a lot of people who thought that because of their headscarf, who did not want to shed their headscarf, and because of their headscarf, they were not able to perhaps go to universities. Those issues were kind of, it struck a chord with these support base, the Anatolian, strong Anatolian rural underclass actually. So that is something which is important. But 2013 is one of the main, you can say, timeline where the problem in terms of domestic polity and in terms of the economic problems which started. especially in terms of the handling of the Gezi Park protest and how the young protesters who were just who had come out through social media mobilization, and they thought that they can protest against this environment based on the environmental concern about changing of a public park into a economic market kind of development project and all that. So, but the way it was handled by the police and the way it was handled by the government in a very high-handed manner, that brought the issue of crackdown and problems in terms of equality, and how that was a diversion tactics to put things away from the focus away from the economic issues. So that is something which was very, very important as far as the issue of economy and the issue of support base was concerned. Then there is this question of, if I can take the
the foreign policy one.
Yeah, the foreign policy issue about how Turkey is proactive. That is why many people say that Erdogan is trying to revive that pan-Islamist idea and become a new Ottoman Sultan. I would tend to agree with that kind of prognosis, that Erdogan has this idea of a grand Islamic, even if not the revival of a caliphate, but a grand Islamic, pan-Islamic idea where all the Muslim countries have a very good relation and they can perhaps come together and put up a kind of change, or at least have some better or more say in the international order and things like that, and Turkey playing a role of a leadership in that sense. And that is why there has been a lot of tension between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and there are also, despite on some geopolitical issues, Turkey and Iran having certain similarities. Even with Iran also there is a lot of tension, because again, this is that idea of pan-Islamist things, and this is very significantly or very visibly playing out not only in Syria but also in Libya, if you look at it, the current situation in Libya. So I think that is something which is important. And if you go back to some of the recent statements by the UAE foreign minister and the Arab League, they have said about saying that we do not want another colonial imperial ruler, Ottoman ruler in the Arab world. So that is something which is I think important.
There's a question about the Brotherhood's philosophy in Erdogan's politics.
So I think I completely agree to your point, in the sense that, but the Brotherhood of Turkey and the Brotherhood of Egypt, I think there is some difference. There are differences in terms of how they look at the society, and there are also differences in terms of how they look at the politics. So, for example, when it comes to the issue of women, Turkey, the Turkish Brotherhood, the AKP, has come a very long way from how Brotherhood in other parts of the world looks at it, or the Islamists look at it in other parts of the world, including, for example, in the subcontinent as well. When it comes to the Turkish Brotherhood, they look at it in a very different way. In terms of foreign policy, yes, I'm again, whether if that Brotherhood issue comes into the picture, and then that grand Ottoman grand strategy idea, if that comes into the picture, how will that play out? I am not sure. Perhaps that there would be we will see a lot of differences actually cropping up. So right now it looks as if it's all seamless to get working together, but I think once it comes out a little, it will be much more of a differences that will come out. I think that is something, but again, we'll have to wait and watch as to how things pan out.
There's a comment about Malaysia's role in the alliance.
Will have to be seen. Yeah, I mean that was more because of the Mahathir Mohamad's. He had a different view. I think Malaysia as a country and as a political system, And no, there is a difference between what he was thinking and how the political leadership, other leadership also do not want to kind of uh, compromise on the relationship with Saudi Arabia. So, the economic relationship, that is something which is important. And perhaps even Mahathir Mohamad was also aware, so he also backed down a little before his resignation also. So I think that is something, but we'll have to see, wait and watch how things pan out.
Okay, so you're going to come towards the end. So essentially, you're saying that he had a large mandate and he was able to tweak the system accordingly, from making it the super presidency to the thing. And of course, the factor you introduced about how economic stability and economy actually helped the political leaders to strengthen and consolidate. And when that didn't happen, the political repression started, and it's so up to a point. I think people kind of support or go along with the system. And so I think what for me opened up today was I've only have exposure to Istanbul, where I've seen a very evening life, women freely walking around in proper, in Western clothes and not covered. But we always looked at the the scarf angle from a modern, or I would say a Western perspective. The fact that if you're wearing a scarf, you're not allowed, which essentially rules out a large part of the population, which obviously has a certain impact on how the domestic policies unfold. I'm not even going to try and, but this is very interesting and fascinating. Thank you for that, sir. Over to you, Kumar. You want to wrap up?